What parallels do you see between the LSAT and law school?
The reading comprehension section, because you're reading hundreds of pages of case opinions and black letter law textbooks every single week in law school, well, I can guarantee you, just as a marker for yourself, if you're scoring 10 or less out of 27 on reading comprehension, even if you got like 23 out of 23 right on logic games, and your score was good enough to get into some law schools, you're going to have a very hard time in law school because, not having even, 50th percentile proficiency in reading comprehension. Well, reading comprehension is what it's all about. I mean, the amount of time for return on investment when studying on a week by week basis in law school, and also when taking law school exams, the things that matter the most when it comes to those things is, well, is it going to take me 3 hours to read this constitutional laws reading assignment, or is it going to take me 8 hours? And if it's going to take you 8 hours, well, you're just not going to make it because you have other classes, you have other obligations, and you need to be able to be someone whose skills before even beginning law school in reading comprehension especially are proficient enough to where you'll be able to handle your load in a timely fashion and an efficient fashion, and being able to outline based off of it and take notes off of it and brief based off of it. And then for logical reasoning, I mean, I think there's a big transferable aspect to it as well in terms of predictability of success in law school, because for LR, you're breaking down arguments, you're identifying fallacies, and you're issue spotting and, using deductive reasoning in order to figure out, like, well, what's the flaw here? What is the main point here? Whatever the case may be. And in all those instances, those same principles will apply towards reading case opinions, and especially when you're going through the facts of cases, because that's very important. The two most important things in case opinions are the character and nature of the facts, and then, the holding of the case based on what the court rules. So if you can't put those two things together and arrive at, decently quick understandings of the relationship between the two, then you're going to be in a difficult situation with doing well in law school. So there is a very strong transferable aspect to logical reasoning, reading comprehension, and I would say logical games applicability may be a little bit more obscure and generalized and secondary in effect, but it's still probably arguably there. It's not only important to do well on the LSAT because you want to get into law school and get scholarships, but it's also important to do as well as possible, with particular emphasis on the sections that, you have the bare bones skills that you need in order to do well when 1L hits. So I think, I mean, most people who get into law school and enroll, they probably don't fail out, but I mean, even in my law school, I've experienced that we started off with a class of like 110, and now we have maybe 85 or something like that. So there is an attrition rate. Everybody needs to understand that, there is an attrition rate. And if you are going in and you don't have the skills that you need at a 50th percentile or higher amongst law school students in the country, you're putting yourself at an extreme disadvantage. And the great thing is that you have control over that, because if you're not on that level yet, let's say with reading comprehension, you have the opportunity to fix that before you even begin law school. So I would definitely say that is an added aspect of importance, is don't waste your time and money, getting a sufficient LSAT score, but ignore that, you didn't do as well as you could have when it comes to gaining and mastering the skills to actually remain in law school and to do well enough to achieve your goals.
Yeah, so most people don't fail out of law school, but there are people who do fail out of law school. So you don't want to be one of those people. But what I think is even worse is being one of the people who don't fail out, but then just have to have the worst time in law school for 3 years. It's going to be so hard for you. My 3 years in law school were like the easiest 3 years of my life. I had gone to Cornell undergrad, and that was challenging. But then when I got to law school, it was like so easy. And I went to Wash U. Most of the students there probably had a 165 on the LSAT. I had a 171. And it was just simple to me. and I barely had to do anything during the semester. I would have had to do a little bit more if I wanted a 4.0. I think I got like a 3.2 or 3.3 or something. But at the end of the semester, I just be like, okay, it's 2 weeks out from the test. Time to read these books that they've been going over for the whole semester. Read the books. Okay, I know the information. Here you go. And just put it onto the test. And so it was super easy, but it would not have been super easy if I was not able to read the stuff, especially because they give you these textbooks that have all this unnecessary information. It's like almost unreadable. I didn't even start with the textbooks. I went to other books first. I was like, okay, this stuff is unintelligible. Let me read something that tells me what the hell is going on first. Let me find that, read that, then I'll read the textbook, all in probably like 2 weeks before the final exam. And also, let me pick my classes so I don't have to be constantly going to these classes. Let me pick the ones that I don't have to attend, because this is kind of a waste of time. And I'd rather be like hanging out, playing basketball, exercising, doing my business that I was had started. So to me, law school was such a breeze, and it can be that way for anybody who's prepared. But if you're not prepared, or if you're kind of prepared, it's going to be hard. That seems to be the experience of most people. So if you're just barely getting into law school, that's not a good thing, in my opinion. That's like signing up for 3 years of hell. Why would you do that? Maybe you would do that because you think there's no other way, but there is another way. You could just get really good at reading, and then you could just teach yourself everything that you need to know in law school very quickly. I think people don't understand, or maybe don't want to understand, the importance of speed. Let's say you went to a mechanic and he said, oh yeah, I can fix your engine. It's going to take 10 weeks. You'd just never go to that mechanic. That mechanic would be out of business real fast. And even if for whatever reason, maybe you were going on vacation and you don't care when your car gets done, so you just leave it with him. If he's working on your car for 10 weeks, how is he making money? He's not going to be able to service enough clients to even pay rent. So he's going to shut down, or barely be holding on and become an alcoholic or something and mess up your car. Things that aren't getting done quickly, they just won't get done. So if you are going to law school and let's say you had extended time on the LSAT, and maybe that was barely enough, how are you going to operate professionally as a lawyer? I mean, you might be able to make it work. There's niches and stuff that you could get into maybe, but it's going to be tough. I wouldn't recommend it, especially when you could just get better. You could just get better at this stuff and faster. You ended with that point that there is hope. It's not like you have to right now be fast and great. You can just get fast and great at these skills.
For logic games, it doesn't seem from a surface level to have much to do in terms of practical applicability to success in law school. But obviously there are arguments for logic games having a little bit of applicability in that, with concepts like, choosing between possibilities, exhausting options, and, maybe it helps with issue spotting some when it comes to, doing it from a more alternative perspective of secondary mental processes.
I think you're right that you can't really see the connection between logic games and law school too much. But I think when you're a lawyer and you're working on making an argument, and the argument has about 10 different parts and about 5 different alternatives, I mean, it feels almost like a logic game, except for a lot more complicated when you're writing some appellate brief and it's really legally intensive. And you're like, try to make this argument, and you're like, okay, well, this word in this statute means this, and we know it means this because this case said this. And there's this argument that the case didn't say that, but then it did. But back to the original point, even if that word doesn't mean this, then you got to look at this. And there's like branching tree of logic and argument, and it is overwhelming. And if you don't even know how to do a few branches of alternatives of, worlds and possibilities on logic games, I don't know how you're going to do a complicated, detailed legal argument. And even just the idea of keeping things clear and organized in a logic game is really important to making these legal arguments and doing your research on the legal arguments and putting together the list of cases and all this stuff. So I think because you're not doing that so much in law school, because they have you reading more instead of writing, especially writing complicated arguments, I think logic games doesn't seem as relevant. But I think when you're practicing, if you're doing complicated stuff, which you probably will be, especially in the future, because if it's not complicated, we'll just get a computer to do it. So I think logic games might be perhaps the most important section in some ways, or let's say the most cognitively fundamental section, because you can learn English if you can organize information. But if you can't even organize the information, the English is going to be tough. And even if you learn it, I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, when I see logic games, I think you're right that in law school, they don't teach you how to be a lawyer. They teach you how to master the black letter law. So you have a foundation, and then you can learn how to be a lawyer from, whether it's internships or clerking, or from, actually beginning off working in a firm, or whatever the case may be. But I do think that logic games may relate to how when you're actually lawyering, like you said, you're dealing with possibilities and proportionalities in your arguments that are based on, both common law and statutory law. Then you're taking into consideration, the court rules of the judicial district or the higher court. And, you're dealing with, other things going on as well, like, rules of procedure and things like that. So, and then you have discovery and, exhausting possibilities, trying to maximize the efficiency of it or effectiveness of it. And yeah, I mean, I definitely think law school is a lot less complicated than being a lawyer. So I completely agree with you. Maybe the complicatedness or introduction to complexity with logic games and a different way of thinking may help in that regard. Absolutely.
I only talked about making a legal argument, but even just planning a legal action. Okay, when are we gonna file this? Should we file this? What if we don't file this? What if we file this instead? What if we file both? What if we file this one first? What if we file this other one first? We got to be checking this whole time on who's filing stuff against us. Wait a second, new plan. Something got filed against us. Throw that old plan out. We got to do this whole differently. I mean, it's really, really complicated if you want to do it well. You can do it poorly, and you can just, I mean, maybe your client wouldn't notice because they don't know what they're doing either. And so maybe your client loses some money because you don't do as well as you could have. Maybe they lose their kids because you don't do as well as they could have. Maybe they get deported because you don't do as well as they could have. You could do all that, and many lawyers do. But if you want to help people, it's pretty complicated to do that. You don't help people in the law usually in cases where it's obvious what's going to happen. If it was obvious what's going to happen, there wouldn't be a lawsuit. People would just settle or whatever, And so the cases where people need help from a lawyer, they're complicated cases. There's all kinds of different evidence, and there's all kinds of different legal opinions, and there's all kinds of different rules and all, different things to follow. And so, if you can't deal with that complexity effectively, then you're not going to be able to help the person, essentially. Although maybe you could rely on the other lawyer being just as bad as you, so maybe you still win. I don't know, but if you want to, really be able to help people and to help people, or if you want to really be able to help people with complex issues, so you can make a lot of money. Either way, you're going to have to know. You're going to have these cognitive, organizational, conceptual, organizing skills that I think is tested a lot in logic games.
Yeah, and even all three sections, including logic games, probably is applicable towards people who want to be transactional lawyers as well, because you're doing so much document review and you're literally being paid the big bucks to be different than somebody doing it themselves, in that you can truly exhaust all of the legal possibilities and considerations that need to be there. And you have an eye for, things that are right and things that are wrong in terms of them being applicable to that specific situation. So, I would say either way, that's all that holds weight. So
ChatGPT can already get a 160 on the LSAT. So I would say try to be better than the computer now, because the computers are only going to get better, and there's not going to be any place for you if you can't compete with a 2023 computer. What is that computer going to look like in 2028? So I would recommend everybody going to law school to actually try for a 160, 165, 170.
When somebody says to themselves, oh, well, should I go to law school? The first thing they probably do is go to one of the three. They go to Facebook or Instagram, type in LSAT, see what comes up. They go to Google and type in LSAT, should I apply on Google? Or they go to YouTube and they type that in. And I think that in doing so, the first things that pop up is going to be, the Princeton Review guys, the Kaplan guys. It's going to be the big name tutors who charge, 200 plus an hour. When I was coming out of undergrad, the reason I didn't apply for law school right out is because I didn't think it was realistic. I felt like, oh, well, I probably have to score this crazy LSAT score in the high 170s. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is by paying, $1,000. I don't have that. I was the approach when I was graduating undergrad that I'm completely financially independent. What am I going to do right now with that? I can't do anything. So I decided to become a high school teacher. And I just think there's plenty of people like me or like others in that regard. And they need to understand that what they're seeing out there on first impression is not, the reality of the feasibility and the resources out there to get good tutoring, good help, and a good plan, and ultimately be able to get into law school, and even if they want, get scholarships.
I've tutored hundreds of students. Most of them, before they were working with me, used other companies, other tutors, etc., and they failed. And it's clear why they failed to me, because those other companies are teaching things wrong or in an unhelpful way. So to me, I look at the LSAT market, I see that 80, maybe it's down to 60, 70% of the options out there, of the material out there, is unhelpful. And I expect it to lead to failure for many students. And so I think that it's kind of realistic and valid to say, yeah, most students are going to struggle because they're not going to be able realistically to find the hidden gems out there. And even if they do, how would they distinguish those tutors that are good from those tutors that are not good? I mean, I don't know how a student is supposed to do that. I mean, you can rely on reviews to some extent, but every company is going to have some good reviews because there's students out there that are going to succeed no matter what they use. And so, I mean, I try to have, video reviews for the most part. I mean, people are free to leave Yelp reviews and stuff, but I try to have video reviews so people can well, first of all, that the review is even authentic, and also kind of a little bit more in-depth information from a student about their experience, especially comparing their experience with me to what they've done in the past. But yeah, I just see a lot of people struggling and with a lot of different programs, and it does seem kind of difficult from a student's perspective, if I were going to put myself in the student's perspective, to choose something that is actually going to work.
I completely agree. I think so. Just using personal experience, when I was first looking for LSAT prep materials, the first place I went was the first thing that I already knew from, being a student for the past 16 years. And that was Princeton Review. I was just like, okay, Princeton Review or Kaplan has got to be the first place I need to check. And there were two things that came from that. Number one, I saw the prices and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I can't afford this. And then the second thing that came to my mind was, well, I have no doubt in my mind, if I could afford this, that this is probably the best because they have the most, usage rates and stuff like that. Like you said, falling into the category of what 70 to 80% of people are going to first try to go with. And I completely concur with you. I agree that after some experience, trying to figure out, well, Varsity Tutors and Princeton Review and Kaplan, I was shocked to find out when I did just my own analysis of less findable resources out there and materials, that it wasn't until I was dealing with material resources or tutors who were not in the most popular come to mind categories, who did well on the LSAT and did have experience tutoring, nonetheless, who were able to provide things that actually were consequential towards substantial improvement. Because I think that those large companies, they're and those other resources that are like the most easy to find, what they're doing is first they have the most money for marketing. So that just comes as natural that people find that first or think of it first. And that's all they really have for their name. And what they do is they hire tutors for one-to-one tutoring, or they put resources out there that are a combination of two things. First, it's somebody who they have verified to some extent has scored a minimum score on the LSAT or whatever standardized test it is. And secondly, it's using common generalized principles of standardized testing. And the truth is that for the LSAT, standard common principles for standardized testing, like process of elimination for multiple choice and what somebody might have been able to do in the past for a reading-based test, those things are not truly the most consequential towards success in the LSAT, because the LSAT is obviously designed to be a much more difficult test than many other standardized tests, and it's also what it's testing for and what it's trying to see if you have the competency and skill to do in terms of preparation for law school and indications of being able to do well in law school. It's very unique. I know for a fact that even those big companies that charge all that money, I mean, oftentimes those tutors are just, they're not really doing anything effective. They're just going on a whiteboard or going through things and explaining it real quick to you, trying to get the maximum bang for the buck. And they're trained to not really care about much else other than redirecting you to, spending as much money as possible. So all those things in mind, I completely agree with the point you were making, that the first 70 to 80% of what's out there that's commonsensical to people based on what shows up in their media and on the internet, like the big testing companies and stuff, they're not getting nuanced enough to result in students getting the highest results possible. It's crazy to me that oftentimes the people who tutor on those big companies, Mission Review, Kaplan, Varsity Tutors, they might have gotten a certain score on the LSAT, but heck, a lot of the times they never even went to law school. And to me, it's just like, if you don't understand or don't have firsthand experience of why you even took the LSAT or why it was going to become important later on, then you can't relate to clients and understand like the importance of why this test is the way it is, and figuring out those nuanced concepts and strategies and understandings when it comes to question types and breaking it down to the level you need to, when it comes to the importance of blind review, when it comes to the importance of following an instructional approach that is tailored specifically to the LSAT.
You think that going to law school and or becoming a lawyer is useful, maybe even critical, to be a good LSAT tutor? I think that I might agree. I see a correlation in the tutors that I've interacted with. Those that go to law school or become lawyers seem to be better tutors. Why do you think using a tutor who went to law school is important?
First of all, somebody who's gone to law school and experienced some success in law school has proven that somebody can read through, tons of case opinions and successfully comprehend what they've read, can on law school exams, question prompts and fact patterns, and comprehend what they read effectively and what's being asked of them. Or for logical reasoning, somebody can distill the different portions of case opinions, with understanding of what's being, offered. Or
what would be the difference in your mind between somebody who's never went to law school but gets a good score on reading comp and somebody who did make it through law school and gets a good score on reading comp?
I think that probably the best contrast between the two would be that somebody who's actually gone to law school is going to have a personalized understanding of why reading comprehension on the LSAT is important. And also, I do think that it helps a lot that somebody that's gone to law school is going to have a little bit of background knowledge. Like I found that when I tutor reading comprehension law genre passages, having that understanding of the basic, judicial system and the, legal system, it helps me to be able to give students that aha moment in terms of like, oh, okay, so this is what this is really telling me or saying to me. When I remember the other day, I was tutoring a student and they were stuck on, well, it was talking about the Canadian justice and law system for Aborigines people in the 20th century who wanted property rights based on the law. And, it was talking all about, higher courts and lower court decisions, interpretation of their constitution and all these things. And they were just completely lost. And I think, going to law school, first of all, it helps with things like that, being able to explain, what's really going on and what you need to understand in the bare bones of what's being tested of you. And also you have that application experience. I would venture to say that after law school, somebody could probably do better on the LSAT than they did before law school. So with that additional experience, they've now had a firsthand application experience for 3+ years in, applying the principles of logical reasoning, applying the principles of reading comprehension in great bulk, which, honestly, when you're preparing for the LSAT and taking it for the first time before law school, you don't have the, direct experience with, reading 300 pages a week. You don't have the direct experience of taking law school exams. So when somebody can curtail that to that experience, well, maybe it's possible that somebody with raw talent on standardized tests got, 20+ out of 27 on reading comprehension. And it's also possible that somebody else who actually went to law school got a similar score. But now that that person has gone to law school, they have probably gone through the, the trenches in a way where, and the challenges in a way with those burdens that were being tested for, if you can meet them, to where they can even tutor it better now, that they could perform better or teach somebody else to perform better than they even did themselves in their peak score.
Yeah, I think knowledge of the legal system is helpful to explain many things on the LSAT. Many things on the LSAT are about stars and dinosaurs and who knows what, but there are significant legal topics. And then, yeah, I think you're also saying that basically there's just more practice with the reading and all this kind of thinking and stuff that you've done in law school, and maybe in a more grueling way, perhaps. And so your mind would just be better prepared for the LSAT and for teaching the LSAT.
I think because there's so few people who, actually go to law school and persist through graduating from law school, that it's not a lot of people who can truly both understand what the LSAT is asking of people, and also who, even if they did well, understand how to teach the test.
Yeah, not everybody that does well can teach it. Obviously, there's some skills involved in teaching. I always compare it to teaching somebody how to walk. I really don't know how to do that. I mean, I could probably figure it out, but I don't know what my body is doing. Even though I'm pretty good at walking, I don't know what my body is doing when I walk. I'd have to figure it out and analyze and break it down and then communicate it to somebody. And all that is stuff that is extra in terms of being able to do it.
What is your personal advice for somebody who is a junior or senior in college, or somebody who's a few years out and is exploring things that they might want to do after having taken an entry-level job or something, and is thinking about law school, when they don't know if they can either A, afford thousands of dollars for tutoring, or B, feels like there's probably no hope because it's not like they had like a 3.8 plus undergrad GPA and didn't get like a 36 on the ACT in high schools, and that's all the experience and background they have.
Somebody who didn't get a high GPA, the LSAT's a godsend for that person, because law schools don't care, kind of. If you get a high LSAT score, you're golden, and you'll get a lot of money from a lot of law schools. Even some of the top 20 law schools. So the LSAT's great in that sense for such people. Now, you actually have to get a high LSAT score for that to matter. Although you can get scholarship money with lower LSAT scores, like 150, 160 at some schools. That makes this issue of, well, I can't afford the tutoring, or it's impossible to get that score for me, or whatever. That makes that even a bigger issue. Well, there's many things I would say to somebody who is saying I can't get the money, or I can't get the score, or something like that. Let's take, I can't get the money first. I just don't have the money to invest. So number one, I suppose such a person would be banking normally on loans to pay for their law school. Because if they don't have the money for tutoring, they probably don't have the money, like the cash for law school. So they're going to get loans, or maybe the military is going to pay for it, or something like that. But if you're going to get loans and you're set on trying to go to law school, and you're going to cover it with loans, that's going to be $100,000 loans, or whatever it is, 50,000, depending on the school. If you get a high LSAT score, that can kind of go away. So that would be the number one priority. I mean, I don't think there's, for a person set on going to law school and they have to pay for that law school, I don't think they will ever in their life have a better opportunity for financial gain than investing in LSAT tutoring that's good, getting a high score, and getting a scholarship. If you invest 2,000 and get 10,000, that's quintupling, but you'll get 100,000. I don't know any investment opportunities like that. And it's such a solid investment opportunity if you are willing to put in the work and find a reputable, good tutor with good credentials and stuff like that. So if there's any way to get the money, and there often is, it's a major investment opportunity, basically. So get the money. Nowadays, there's even businesses like PayPal and others that give you loans pretty easily. You don't even have to talk to anybody to get a loan. You have a PayPal account, and whatever, I don't know, you probably have to have used it a little bit or something, but I have students who are paying, they have the option to pay only $100 a month, or 150 or 200 or $250 a month back to PayPal. So I have students that pay me, like I had a student recently sign up for like 60 hours of tutoring with me. I don't remember exactly what the price was. They paid me something 3,000, 4,000, I don't know. But PayPal gave me the money, and then that student's going to pay PayPal back, $100 or $200 a month or whatever for until it's paid off. And there's some interest, but like I said, I mean, the interest is nothing compared to the financial benefit of not having to pay law school tuition. So that's an option too. Of course, you can get money for, some people can get money from family, friends, campaign online, or, GoFundMe or whatever. So there's a lot of options for a lot, I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of people that don't have the money can get the money. I feel like that's actually not the biggest issue for people getting the money. I feel like the biggest issue is that they don't want to get the money because they don't want to spend the money, because either they don't think the tutoring is going to work, perhaps because it hasn't worked in the past with other tutors, or because they don't want to put in the work, but maybe they're not ready to admit that to themselves yet. They want to oh yeah, I want to study for the LSAT, I want to go to law school. Maybe they don't know how much work it will take, or maybe they do know and they're not really wanting to do that. So, so then the money becomes the quote unquote barrier, but really it's not that. Of course, for some people, it might be a purely financial issue, I suppose. But luckily there's good programs now that are pretty cheap. I know when I first joined major LSAT Facebook group, I don't know, 4 years ago or something, there was just one-on-one tutoring. But I started doing personally group tutoring with small groups of students. There was group tutoring before. It was like big companies trying to, get as many students as possible into a class and take their money and not offer them really any individualized instruction. But when I started offering small class tutoring, so that people are paying, 3, 4, 5 students are paying $20, $30 an hour each. I don't remember anybody doing that when I started doing that. And I started doing it, and then people had to compete with that, so they started doing it. I could just focus on people who have more money and more availability to pay, but why would I want to do that? I'd like to help a lot of other people too, maybe more so. I knew I had to keep the quality high, and that meant I can't have too many students in these classes. But I said, okay, I can get 3, 4 students together, and we can have basically one-on-one classes, and they can, all chip in, and that'll work. And it did work. And then after I started that, I made this app. I invested about $100,000 or maybe more to make and maintain this app called LSAT Angel. And that app I use to facilitate mostly my group tutoring, but also my one-on-one, because there's some advantages to the app so it helps for one-on-one tutoring also. But yeah, it really helps streamline the group tutoring process. So I think I've probably at some points had 50 students at a time, each one of whom is getting a pretty individualized tutoring experience. So anyway, currently, you don't have to pay $200 an hour for great tutoring. You can pay 20, 30 something dollars an hour and get great tutoring. And you can also pay that same amount and get not good tutoring. But, if you find a tutor that's credible, find a tutor that's a lawyer, find a tutor that has an high LSAT score, probably find a tutor that didn't spend years trying to, crack the LSAT, they kind of get it, various things to look for, but, video reviews from students, anyway, so those are some of my responses to students in that situation.
I think students would be blessed to hear this from you. Pivoting a little bit, what is your advice or insight to students who they're interested in the concept of law school and maybe going to law school, but they are discouraged from hearing from other people who maybe they perceive as being smarter than them or just as smart as them about their stories of lack of success with the LSAT? They say something to them like, first thing you do is you ask around when you're thinking about something, you don't know anything about it. So, maybe they know somebody who thought about going to law school or tried to go to law school in their family or a friend or a classmate or something like that. And they told them, oh, well, I tried my best, and you know how I'm a little bit smarter than you, or we're just as smart as each other. And, my top score was a 144 and I didn't get into anywhere. So I couldn't get anywhere with that. So don't even try, don't even bother with it. What would be your advice to somebody like that?
Well, again, there's a lot of things that I could say. I'll start with this one. I noticed that people very often, when it comes to the LSAT and other things in life, but when it comes to the LSAT, they look for advice from people in similar situations in terms of like people with similar demographic characteristics or people with similar scores, which like a low score or something like that. So my first piece of advice would be stop talking to people who don't know what they're talking about. If they have a low score, they don't know what the LSAT is. So don't talk to them about how feasible studying for the LSAT is or how important it is or whatever. They don't even know what the LSAT is. Talk to somebody who has a high score, other credentials too, reviews, etc. Talk to them. Talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about. You wouldn't go to your friend and be like, hey, what do you think about this surgery? What would they know about the surgery, right? You might ask something, but you'd probably go to the doctor and ask. You probably go to get a second opinion from other doctors. It's kind of strange to me that the degree to which people seek out others who are struggling with the LSAT to ask them for help or advice. So that would be my first piece of advice. Go to somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. Now, one reason people might not want to do that is because maybe they already went to somebody who they thought knew what they were talking about and it didn't work out. So that's understandable. If 70% of the market really doesn't know how to teach the LSAT and you've been to 3, 4 tutors and different classes and whatever, and it's still not clicking for you, then it's understandable that you would come to the conclusion that another tutor selling another thing is not going to be able to help you. So, so that's understandable. I guess the second piece of advice I would say is, if you have done things, had experiences, tutoring classes, etc., and if you've done several of these things, you probably have come to the conclusion that everybody's kind of teaching the same thing, and that doesn't work for you. Okay, so find somebody who's not. Find somebody who's not teaching the same thing. Don't go to somebody who's teaching the same stuff. If a tutor is telling you, oh yeah, just get the Power Score book and we'll work on that. Oh yeah, we'll get this book, and don't do that, right? Because they're clearly just doing the same things everybody else is doing. Or I say clear, it's clear to me, but I don't know if it's clear to students. Most of the tutors and companies out here are just copying each other's materials and just selling it. It's the same thing. And that doesn't work for a lot of students. Some students it works for, it's fine. Those students will basically figure it out on their own. Even though the material is not the greatest, they'll figure it out, figure out what's going on with the LSAT. But for most, the overwhelming majority, I think, of students, it doesn't work. So don't do it. But that doesn't mean don't get help. That just means make sure the help you're getting is from somebody who's doing something unique.
The statistics showing that minorities score like 10 points less on average on the LSAT. I mean, I just think that those are the people who should be encouraged, that, once you get with somebody who knows what they're doing, that there's still strong hope for you. For minority students who look up their LSAT scores, or that LSAT scores are, the average LSAT score for a minority is like low 140s, whereas even after people are prepared, and as compared to the average LSAT score for, whites and, certain Asian ethnic 150s, and them being discouraged by, that disparity in the average scores. What would be your advice to them in terms of, capability and feasibility for them? Because obviously, like you said, people tend to seek out, and relate and base their beliefs off of people who are most like them. So what would be your advice or insight to them specifically?
Sure. So different minorities deal with different issues probably. But I think many minorities of different racial subsets probably deal with this same issue. Not every racial minority deals with this issue, but many do. It's that the LSAT is standard American English, and Black people, that's not the language they speak. And like Mexican people, they might speak that language, but then they also speak maybe Spanish, and so they only spend half their time, or 60% of the time, or 80% of the time speaking English, versus a native one language English speaker speaking standard American English, who would spend 100% of their time focused on learning English implicitly or whatever. So anyway, it's a language barrier. I mean, most standard American English is a language spoken, is the language of white people. Right. If you're not white, the chances are you don't speak that language, or you don't speak that language with 100% of your time. So you're going to be worse at that language. Just like if I took a test LSAT in, Spanish or Arabic or something, I would just bomb it because I don't know anything about those languages. I only speak English. So but people think that, oh, there's just one English language in America. No, there's many different English languages in America. And then there's many other languages too. So it is going to be harder for somebody who's not as fluent in standard American English, because the test is in standard American English. And there's other reasons too that it might be harder. Like, for example, the topics that they cover are topics that often would just be more prevalent in white media, culture, etc., rather than Black culture or whatever. So anyway, I would say, yeah, it's going to be harder. There's a reason that Black students or others, I don't know. I know about Black students. I don't know about other minorities, but they get lower LSAT scores. That's because they know less about the LSAT, about what it's asking about, and what the LSAT wants, and this language stuff and other things. And so it's probably going to be harder. So do more if you want the score. That's the only way. There's no other way to get an LSAT score other than by learning the things that the LSAT wants you to know. Right.
Yeah.
So that would be the beginning of my advice for that kind of person, I guess.
Yeah, I think that naturally progressive mastery of the sophistication of language that is used on almost all standardized tests is probably the causal root of, why, like you're saying, certain subsets of minority groups they struggled on the ACT and SAT more comparatively, and then they get to this next test, whether they're trying to go to law school, med school, or business school, and regardless of what test they're taking, they have those same fears and those same anxieties because they realize, okay, I fall into this statistic, and I didn't do very well on the ACT or SAT, so now this is my second go around with standardized testing, and it's probably not going to go well. So yeah, I think overcoming those doubts is, like you said, you need somebody to help you who can understand and sympathize and be able to equip you with what you need to get over that extra hump. So I completely agree.